I want to tell you about the difference between winning and being right. Most people treat these as the same thing. They are not. Winning is an outcome. Being right is a position. You can win while being wrong. It happens constantly, in business, in politics, in personal relationships, in every arena where power and truth operate on separate tracks. And you can be right while losing, which is its own particular kind of pain, the kind that does not have the consolation of the outcome going your way. The best moments, the rare ones, are when winning and being right happen simultaneously, when the outcome and the truth arrive in the same room at the same time, and you get to stand at the intersection of both. I was right on March 14th. I had been right about the acquisition, right about the vision, right about what VELOX needed to become and why short-term money was the wrong choice. I had been right, and I had lost anyway, and the loss had cost me 6 weeks of silence and 42 days of patience, and more runs with objecting lungs than I cared to count. The second board meeting was the moment I got to be both right and winning at the same time, in the same room. I want to tell you that it felt like I imagined it would feel. It did not. It felt like something more complicated than that, more human, more mixed, the way real moments almost always feel when you have spent a long time imagining them. Slightly off from the version in your head, richer in some ways and smaller in others, containing things you did not predict alongside the things you did. It contained Daniel's face. That was the thing I had not predicted accurately. I had imagined his face many times in those 6 weeks, and none of my imagined versions matched the real one. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it started. I drove to VELOX at 7:15 a.m., earlier than I needed to be. I wanted to be in the building before anyone else on the board arrived. Not for strategic reasons. Sandra and I had not discussed it. It was not part of the plan. It was something more instinctive than that. A need to reclaim the physical space before the meeting claimed it. To walk through the lobby and take the elevator and move down the corridor in the morning light without an audience. To feel the building again as mine before the question of whether it was mine was put back on the table. Maria was at the front desk. She looked up when I came through the door, and something moved across her face that she controlled quickly, but not before I caught it. Not surprise exactly, something more like relief. The expression of someone who had been waiting for a thing to happen and was glad to see it beginning. She said good morning. I said good morning. The normalcy of it, the ordinary exchange, the same words we had used hundreds of times, was quietly extraordinary. The first ordinary moment in 6 weeks. I took the elevator, the corridor, the morning light golden as always, exactly as always, the sun indifferent to what had happened in the weeks since I had last walked through it. I put my hand on the boardroom door. No pause this time. No reading of the atmosphere through the wood. I knew what was on the other side. An empty room. Coffee being set up by the catering team. Chairs in their positions around the long table. I walked in. The catering team was just finishing. 2 young women I recognized from every significant meeting VELOX had ever held in this room. They had been doing this for years, appearing reliably with coffee and water and the specific quiet efficiency of people who understood that their job was to be invisible while being essential. One of them looked up when I came in, recognized me, glanced at the other one briefly, a whole conversation in a glance, and then looked back at her work. I said good morning. They said good morning. I asked if I could get the coffee going earlier than planned. They said of course. The smaller of the 2 went to start the machine. I sat at the head of the table, took out the 40-page document, Sandra's name on the cover, placed it precisely in front of me. Not in the center of the table, not yet. In front of me, mine. Then I folded my hands and I waited. The coffee machine made its sound. The morning light came through the windows. The Austin skyline outside doing what it always did. I had been waiting for 42 days. A few more minutes was nothing. James Whitmore arrived first, 8:14, earlier than his normal 8:29, which told me he had been briefed that this meeting was different from a routine board meeting, and had responded by arriving earlier. Good. Early arrival signals that a person considers the meeting important. I wanted everyone in that room to understand from the moment they walked through the door that what was about to happen was important. He came through the door, saw me, stopped for exactly 1 second, then composed himself and walked to his usual seat. "Marcus," he said. "James," I said. Same exchange as last time. But the power of the room had inverted, and we both knew it, and the knowing was in both our voices, underneath the neutrality. "You're early," he said. "I wanted to make sure the coffee was fresh," I said. "Last time it was cold." He looked at me. Something moved behind his eyes, not quite amusement, more like acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a man who recognized that what I had just said was not really about the coffee. He sat down, did not say anything else, poured himself a coffee. The others arrived in the following 12 minutes. Board members I had known for years, some since the very beginning, filing in and finding me already at the head of the table, and processing that information in their various ways. Some nodded, some said my name, some went directly to their seats without making eye contact, which told me everything about how confident they felt about what was about to happen. Sandra arrived at 8:24. She came in quietly, acknowledged nobody except me with a brief look that said everything was in order, and took her position along the side wall. Not at the table. Sandra never sat at the table in board meetings. She sat at the wall where she could see everything and be consulted without being a participant. A legal observer with teeth. 3 minutes before the scheduled start. The door opened. Daniel Cross walked in. I had thought about this moment many times. In those 6 weeks, I had run the scene in my head the way you run a scene you are anxious about. Repeatedly, in different versions, trying to anticipate the variables. What would his face show? What would he say? How would the room respond to his entering it and finding me already at the head of it? None of my versions were accurate. Here is what actually happened. Daniel walked through the door at 8:27 with the particular energy of a man who has been told something is coming and has spent the preceding days preparing himself for it and has arrived at a place of, not calm exactly, but resolution. The energy of someone who has made a decision about how they are going to be in the next hour and is committed to it. He saw me, and he stopped. Not for 1 second like James. Longer. 3 seconds, maybe 4, standing in the doorway with his hands still on the handle and his eyes on me, and the room completely still around that moment. I looked back at him. I had decided in those 6 weeks that I was not going to look away first. Not from aggression. I was done with aggression, or trying to be. But from the simple position that I was not ashamed of being in this room, and I was not going to communicate shame through averted eyes. I looked at him, and what I saw in his face was not what I had expected. I had expected defensiveness. The specific tight expression of someone who has been outmaneuvered and knows it, and is marshaling their response. I had expected the face of an opponent. What I saw instead was something more complicated, and more human, and in some ways harder to sit across from than anything I had imagined. He looked tired. Not physically, deeply. The tiredness that collects in a person who has been carrying something heavy for a long time, and has recently begun to understand, in the way that understanding sometimes arrives before you want it to, that the thing they were carrying was heavier than they accounted for. He looked like a man who had gotten what he wanted, and found out in the getting of it what it had cost. He walked to his seat, sat down. I let the silence sit for a moment. Then I said, "Good morning, Daniel." He looked at me. Marcus. That was all. 2 names, the whole 11 years in the exchange of 2 names across a conference table. The meeting began. I opened the meeting at 8:31. I had thought about how to open it. Sandra and I had discussed it, whether I should lead with the legal document, with the investor positions, with the governance argument. We had debated the sequencing of information for the better part of an hour in her office, and had arrived, finally, at the conclusion that the sequence did not matter as much as the tone. The tone needed to be, "This is not a confrontation. This is a solution." I said, "I'm not here to relitigate March. Everyone in this room knows what happened in March. And I think everyone in this room has their own relationship with how it happened. And I'm not interested in adjudicating that today." I looked around the table. Most people looking back now. The averted eyes of March 14th, replaced by the specific attention of people who understood that what was being said in this room had weight. "I'm here because this company has an IPO in 4 months," I said. "And because there is a governance question sitting on top of that IPO that needs to be resolved before the S1 is filed. Not because I put it there, because the original founding documents of this company put it there 12 years ago, and nobody checked them carefully enough before March 14th. I placed the document in the center of the table, Sandra's name visible on the cover. Sandra has prepared a complete legal analysis. I'd ask everyone to take a moment to look at Section 1 before we go further. The sound of 12 people opening a document. The specific rustling that means a room is reading, rather than performing. I waited. Gave it 3 minutes. The short version is this. My voting rights as a major shareholder of VELOX Technologies were automatically restored to their original terms the moment the March 14th vote was recorded. I currently hold 23.4% of this company with full voting rights. I am the single largest individual voting shareholder in VELOX. Silence. Not the silence of surprise. Most of them had been briefed by their own attorneys in the days since Sandra had begun making quiet inquiries. But the silence of the thing being said out loud in the room where it needed to be said. I've also spoken in recent weeks with several of our institutional partners who share my concern about the governance implications of the current situation as it relates to the IPO timeline. I did not name the investors. I did not need to. The implication was sufficient. Their position is reflected in Section 2 of the document. More reading. Longer this time. James Whitmore, reading carefully, his expression giving nothing away, but his posture communicating that he was taking it seriously. Robert Chen, one of the 2 abstentions, reading quickly and then rereading a specific section. Michael Asante, who had voted against me in March, not reading at all. He already knew. He was watching Daniel. Daniel was reading. I watched him read. He was on Section 2, the investor positions, and his face was doing the specific thing that Daniel's face did when he was running mathematics. A slight tightening around the eyes. A stillness that was not calm, but was the opposite of calm, contained by discipline. He reached the end of Section 2, set the document down, looked at his hands for a moment. Then he looked up, at me. "What's the proposal?" he said. His voice was level, completely level. I had been prepared for many possible versions of Daniel in this meeting. The controlled version, the one that had been running VELOX for 6 weeks, with the particular composed efficiency of a man who had decided this was his company now and was going to act like it, was the one sitting across from me. I had respected him for that, in a complicated way, for the entirety of the 6 weeks. Whatever Daniel Cross was or was not, he was not someone who fell apart. I opened Section 3. I walked them through it. Not as a demand, precisely as Sandra and I had designed it. As a proposal. A reasonable, carefully constructed, mutual benefit proposal that solved the legal problem, preserved the IPO, and gave everyone in the room a face-saving path forward. The structure was straightforward. Marcus Reed returns as executive chairman, with oversight of product strategy and long-term vision. Daniel Cross remains president, with full operational authority over day-to-day management, finance, and execution. Clear division of responsibilities, with documented decision rights, so the two positions did not create friction rather than function. A new governance structure, with 2 additional independent directors, bringing fresh perspective and reducing the concentration of existing relationships that had created the conditions for March 14th. And one clause that Sandra had insisted on, and that I had argued against, and then accepted because she was right, as she was usually right. A mutual non-removal clause. Neither founder could be involuntarily removed from their position without a 75% board majority and the written consent of the other founder. It protected me. It also protected Daniel. He noticed. I saw it in the moment he read it. A brief pause, a slight recalibration of his expression. The clause was not what he had expected. He had expected terms that secured my position, at his expense. He had not expected terms that secured both. I watched him process that. Then I watched him look at me, and I said nothing, because there was nothing to say that the clause had not already said. James Whitmore cleared his throat. This is a significant structural change to propose on a... James, I said quietly. The alternative is that we file the S1 in 4 months, with a governance question attached to it that Sandra's office has documented in detail, and that our underwriters are going to find, and that the financial press is going to find, and that is going to become the story of the VELOX IPO instead of the company's actual story. I paused. I don't want that. I don't think anyone in this room wants that. Silence. The proposal resolves it cleanly, I said. It gives the market a governance structure that reflects actual ownership accurately. It gives the company stability. And it gives everyone in this room a version of this story that they can be proud of, rather than one they spend the next several years managing the consequences of. I sat back. That's all I have, I said. The rest is yours. What followed was 40 minutes of the most careful conversation I have ever sat through. Careful in the specific way of people who are making a real decision and know it. Not performing deliberation, actually doing it. Questions to Sandra about the legal specifics. Questions to me about how the executive arrangement would function in practice. Questions between board members in the coded language of people who have been in many rooms together and have developed a shorthand. I answered what was asked of me directly and completely, and did not volunteer more than was asked. Sandra answered legal questions with the precision of someone reading from a document that existed only in her head and was perfectly organized. Daniel said almost nothing for 35 of the 40 minutes. He sat with his copy of the proposal, and he read it and reread it, and I could see him working through it. Not just the legal terms, but the shape of what it meant. What returning Marcus Reed as executive chairman actually meant for the company he had spent 7 months building toward controlling. What the division of authority meant in practice. What it would feel like to sit across from me in this building every day after what had happened between us. At the 36-minute mark, he spoke. Everyone looked at him. The room had been waiting for him, I think. Whatever the board decided formally, Daniel Cross was the person whose position mattered most in terms of what this arrangement would actually look like when it left this room and became the operational reality of a $2 billion company. He said, "I have one question." I said, "Ask it." He looked at me across the table, the tiredness still there, but something else underneath it now, something I had not seen in his face in years, something that might have been, in another context, honesty. "If we do this," he said, "if this arrangement is agreed, and you come back in, can you actually do it? Can you sit in this building and work alongside me every day, and not," he paused, chose the next word carefully, "not make it about what happened?" The room was completely still. I had prepared for many questions. This one I had not prepared for. Not because I did not know the answer, but because I had not expected him to ask it. Had not expected Daniel to be the person who put the human question on the table, in a room full of governance documents and legal language. I looked at him. "I don't know," I said. Nobody moved. "I think I can," I said. "I think the company is worth the effort of trying. I think what we built together is worth more than what happened between us. And I believe, genuinely believe, not strategically, that you know that too." I paused. "But I'd be lying if I told you it was going to be easy, or that the professional arrangement is going to fix the personal thing. It won't. The personal thing is going to take time, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise." Daniel looked at me, a long look, something moving in his face that I could not fully read. Then he said, "Okay." Just that. One word. He looked at James Whitmore. "I support the proposal." The formal vote took 4 minutes. Unanimous. All 12 board members, including Daniel. James announced the result. Sandra made a note. The room began the specific exhale of people who have been holding tension for the duration of a difficult conversation, and are releasing it now that the decision is made. People stood, began gathering their things, the particular busyness that fills a room after a significant decision, as people process it privately while performing normality publicly. I sat for a moment at the head of the table. Just sat. 42 days, 4 investor meetings, 1 paranoid attorney, and a 12-year-old document. Sandra's methodical patience, and Isla's rock collection, and the run that made my lungs object, and the empty whiskey glass, and the almost made phone call. It had worked. The outcome was correct. The plan had executed correctly. Every piece in its place. I sat there and waited for the feeling I had imagined, the clarity of it, the clean satisfaction of a thing completed. It came. It was real. I do not want to minimize it. But it came alongside other things. The tiredness in Daniel's face, the question he had asked, "Can you actually do it?" and the honest answer I had given. The understanding that the board meeting was an ending only in the narrowest sense. In every other sense, it was a beginning. The beginning of something harder and less defined than a legal strategy. The daily work of being in a room with someone who had hurt you, and choosing, over and over, to make it about the company rather than the wound. That was the work that was actually ahead of me. The legal work was done. The human work had just started. I need to tell you about the 30 minutes after the meeting ended. Board members leaving in the various groupings that form naturally after a significant event. The ones who wanted to debrief quietly. The ones who wanted to make calls. The ones who simply needed to be somewhere that was not the room where the thing had just happened. Sandra gathered her materials. Efficiently, completely, the way she did everything. She was the last board-adjacent person to leave. She paused at the door. "Tomorrow," she said. "Yes," I said. I sat in the empty room for a few minutes, looking at nothing in particular, letting the quiet be the quiet. Then I heard a sound. The door, opening. I looked up. Daniel Cross came back in, alone. He had his jacket over his arm, and his phone in his hand, and the look of someone who had turned back from the elevator, and returned to the room for a reason that he had not fully decided how to articulate yet. We looked at each other. He walked to the table, did not sit, stood on the other side, not at his usual seat, just standing, a few feet away, the 40-page document still between us. "I'm not going to apologize," he said. "I know," I said. "Not because I don't." He stopped, started again. "Because an apology right now would be about making myself feel better, and not about anything real." "Okay. What I did," he said slowly, "was not entirely about the company. You know that." "Yes," I said, "I know." He looked at the table. "I told myself it was. For a long time, I built a very convincing case that it was entirely about the company." He paused. It was partially about the company. The acquisition, I said. The acquisition, he agreed, and other things, older things. He looked up. Things I'm not going to get into in this room today, because I don't think either of us is ready for that conversation. No, I said, we're not. But I wanted you to know, he said, that I'm aware, that I'm not, he seemed to be looking for the right word, that I'm not going to pretend the last version of events was the true one. I sat with that for a moment. Then I said something that surprised me, not a planned response, not something I had prepared. Something that arrived from somewhere underneath the strategy and the legal documents and the 42 days and all of it. I said, I missed you. During those 6 weeks. Not the working version of you, the version from the beginning. The dry cleaning shop version. Daniel looked at me. Something moved across his face that he did not control quickly enough to stop me from seeing it. He said, yeah, just that. We stood in the empty room for another moment. The skyline outside, the afternoon light, the table between us still carrying the documents of a war we had fought over the thing we built together. Then Daniel put his jacket on, picked up his phone. I'll see you tomorrow, he said. You will, I said. He walked out. I sat in the empty room alone for a long time after that, not thinking strategically, not running any kind of calculation, just sitting with the complicated, unresolved, deeply human reality of what it meant to build something with a person, and then damage it, and then try to find out whether what was left was enough to build on. I did not know the answer. I was not sure I would know it for a long time. But I was in the room. My room. The room I had chosen for the light in the corridor. And tomorrow I would walk back into the building and begin the work of finding out. I drove home. It was evening by the time I left the building. Later than I had planned. The meeting, the emptying of the room, the 30 minutes with Daniel, the sitting alone afterward. The Austin streets in the early evening doing their thing, the city moving from the pace of the working day into the pace of the night. I called Isla from the car. She answered on the 3rd ring, with the particular distracted quality of a child who has been interrupted in something important. Hi, Dad. Hey, I said. How was your day? A pause. Then, Dad. Yeah? Did you go back to your company today? I had not told her about the meeting. I had told her in general terms that I was working on going back. I had not given her dates or details because she was 7 and the details were not the point. I did, I said. A longer pause. And it went okay, I said. I think. You think? It went well, I said. It's complicated, but it went well. Another pause. Then, with the judicial thoroughness she applied to things she wanted to be sure about. Are you going to be okay? I sat at a red light. The city around me. The evening light doing the specific thing evening light did in Austin. Warm and golden, and lasting longer than you expected before it finally let go. Yeah, I said. I'm going to be okay. Good, she said. Final. Then, Dad, I have to go. Maya is here. She hung up. I sat at the red light for a moment after she was gone. The city moving around me. People going about the evening in the way people do. Purposeful, distracted, connected to their own particular storylines, none of which had anything to do with mine. The light turned green. I drove home. Made dinner. Ate it this time, actually ate it. The appetite that had been intermittent for 6 weeks, apparently deciding that today was the day it came back. Sat in the kitchen afterward with a cup of tea, rather than an untouched whiskey glass. Thought about the board meeting, about Daniel coming back into the empty room, about Sandra's one-word departure, tomorrow, and what tomorrow meant. Sandra was coming to my house in the morning. We had arranged it before the board meeting. She had said, the morning after, at yours, 8 o'clock. I had not asked why my house, rather than her office. I understood that some conversations belonged in different spaces than others. She was going to tell me everything. The folded piece of paper from the fourth cabinet from the left. The name. The file she had been building for 14 months. What Charles Park had meant by, "I think Priya is going to be fine." What Thomas Brightwell had almost said before Sandra walked back in. What Patricia Osei had meant about people in my story I had not fully seen. What the abstention had actually meant. All of it. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. I washed up, went to bed, lay in the dark. Thought about Priya at the founding table, slightly apart, laptop open, always running numbers on something. Thought about her voice on the abstention. Quiet. Definitive. Abstain. Not yes, not no. Something else entirely. I had thought about that word every day for 6 weeks. Filed it and returned to it, and turned it over, and looked at it from different angles. It had sat in my understanding like a door I could see but could not open. Present, solid, clearly there for a reason, waiting for whoever had the key. Tomorrow Sandra was going to give me the key. I closed my eyes, slept. For the second night in a row. I went back into the building. I sat at the head of the table. The proposal was accepted. Daniel came back into the empty room and said something true. And that night I lay in the dark and thought about a door I had been looking at for 6 weeks. Tomorrow morning Sandra was going to open it. And whatever was on the other side was going to change the shape of everything I thought I understood about the story I had been living, including the part where I was the main character. Next episode. Everything. Sandra comes to the house. The folded piece of paper. The name. 4 years of patience explained. And the moment Marcus Reed understood that the most important story in VELOX had never been his.